Hi guys, this is Nancy Miller, the Messy Art Teacher, and I wanted to share this new lesson with you, animation in Photoshop. So this is a video layer animation. So it's really simple, great lesson to do with your students. I picked a Halloween theme because October is coming up, so it might be something that works for the holidays with your middle and high school students. So this is something I do with my graphic students because we do like a cinematograph and we've used photography. You can apply this in a lot of different ways. So I'm going to use Adobe Photoshop 2019. This works in older versions of Photoshop as well. I've done it in Adobe CS6, and that's the, I'm not sure how far it back goes, but you can do it definitely in Adobe Photoshop CS6. Okay, so let's talk about how you would start with your image and finding your images for this. So I go to some sites here, and I'm going to go ahead and show you one that I like. Pexels.com, that's a good one. Another one is Unsplash. Another one after that is freeimages.com. Alright, so I'm going to use Pexels, and then I'm just going to type in the search field cat. And then I search. So I'm going to use this image right here because it kind of reminds me of Halloween. So I'm going to left click on that. There is a free download. Okay, so these sites that I'm giving you, those are royalty free stock sites, and so it won't cost you anything and you don't have to sign up for an account. So down here, up here in the corner, I see the free download. When I hover, I can change the size of it. I'm going to go with the original, and then I would click free download. So then it'll actually download. So if I click that, I don't want to do the 30-day free trial. You can see it downloading down here in my browser. So I'm using Google Chrome. If you are on a PC and you're doing Windows 10, a lot of students end up using Microsoft Edge. You'll just go ahead and click on it, and then it usually asks you, do you want to save it? So you click on the save button, and then you'll go ahead and have it actually, you can open the folder it goes to. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this by clicking on the yellow circle. I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and so what I'm going to do is my canvas size or my artboard size is going to actually be based on the photo that I downloaded. Okay, I'm not really going to go into aspect ratios and things like that. This is just kind of a fun, easy lesson. Get your students' feet wet with animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to go to File and I'm going to go to Open. And I'm going to go ahead and I have a folder that I've created with my stock photo that's already in there, and I'm going to hit open. Okay, and by the way, I don't think I showed you guys what this looks like, but if I hit play, yeah, that's what we're going to do today. It's really simple effect. Clouds are moving back and forth. Things are changing opacity. I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop button. Okay, so I have my file here. Now your setup might look different the first time you launch Adobe Photoshop, and if you're new to teaching Photoshop, this is something I always cover with my students. Let's talk about workspaces. This entire area is a workspace. How do you alter and change that workspace can depend on, if you go in the upper right hand corner and I left click, I've made a custom workspace for myself. So what I usually do is I have it set for graphic and web. Now there is a motion option there, but sometimes the panels I like to use aren't showing, so I do graphic and web, and I click that. And then what I do is I'll go to window, and then I'll go down here to the bottom, and I will want to make this check mark for timeline. So this is this panel right here that you need when you're doing animations in Photoshop. Let's talk about your toolbar. This is the toolbar. The toolbar might look a little different on yours. If you double left click on this darker gray part, see, it'll go into two columns, but I like it in a single column, so I'm gonna double left click, reverts to a single column. Your toolbar might look different, so I like students to reset their toolbar so it looks like mine. So if you go to Edit, go down to Toolbar, second one from the bottom. If I left click on that once, you can customize your toolbar. What I normally do is I will ask students to click on Restore Defaults. All the tools here will move over to the other side. Okay, I like all of this to show, then I would hit done. Okay, so I'm going to cancel that because I've already set up my toolbar the way I want it to be. Okay, so what we need to cover is, besides that, is some of the basic information about the panels that you'll be using with your students. So if you're new to Photoshop, maybe you might feel a little bit intimidated. It's really not that bad. When I talk about Photoshop, I tell students it's like having like pieces of transparency paper. You can have as many sheets as you like, as your computer can handle, and you can draw on each of those separate sheets of paper. So when you think about old style animation, 2D animation like Mickey Mouse, you had sheets of celluloid, and the animators would draw the actual character on one piece of celluloid. They would have another sheet for the background, and they would have other sheets for secondary characters, okay? So it's kind of basically the same principle. So what I'm seeing right now, I have this image here, and what I want to do is I want to free this image. So if I left click on the padlock once, you see it changes, and now I can actually edit that layer. So I'm going to double click on the layer name, and when I do that I could rename it. I'm just going to call it pick, and then I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so I want to add a new sheet of paper, and I'm going to left click on the new layer icon, pops it up right here. So this one I'm just going to call BG, which is short for background in animation. So with the BG selected, because it's in a lighter gray, I'm going to come over to my tools panel, and I'm going to select the paint bucket tool. When you select a tool, changes get reflected up here. This content bar right here will change depending on what tool you have selected. The very top right here, this is called your menu bar. Okay, so I want it to be foreground. Okay, I don't want it to be multiply right now. I want to set it to normal. So I'm going to select that to normal because I was using multiply earlier. So what color is my paint bucket filled with? So if I go down here, there's my set foreground color square. Okay, if you hover over items, it'll kind of give you like a little hint on what it's called. So if I left click once, my color picker comes up, and I can choose a color that I want to fill it with. I talk about with my students, you have your shades, you have your tints, and then you have your hue up here. The bar right here will allow you to adjust by left clicking and holding whatever color you want it to be. So I would like a warmer gray, so I'm going to leave it down here. I'm going to left click once with my circle, and then the new color is reflected here. I'm not going to go over so much of the colors and things like that in Photoshop, but I'm going to hit OK, and then it's going to load it. Okay, when I left click inside this area, because this is selected, it's grayed out. When you select it, you can affect it, and then I can left click in this area, and it fills everything with that color, because everything it's transparent, there's nothing on it, so it's going to fill all of that space. If there was a color in that area, it's going to literally look at it and look for the same value, okay? And if it runs into something that's a different value, it's going to stop that paint bucket, okay? But it's a very quick tool to go ahead and quickly fill in that area. And by the way, if you see a little triangle in the bottom corner, if you right click, those are hidden tools, okay? So sometimes students wonder what that little triangle is. You can also see a letter right here, and that is the keyboard shortcut, okay? So if I change the move tool, which looks like a cross, tap the letter G on my keyboard, boom, there it goes down to the paint bucket tool. Okay, so I'm gonna add another layer again. I can't see my picture layer, so I want to left click on this, and I want to drop the opacity. So there's a little caret here, and I could slide it down and see it's going to update just enough so I want to be able to see that photograph. Okay, I'm going to left click again on layer 1, and this time we are going to add that moon. And so with the moon, I'm going to use an actual shape tool right here, and there's an ellipse tool. So when I left click on this, it updates it in my content bar. I want it set for shape. This gives you the fill, and this is the stroke color. Okay, so students get confused because when they come down here, they think, well, shouldn't it match my set foreground color? No, that doesn't work like that on this tool. If you left click once, you get your own little set of swatches here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it with a color that looks more like a kind of a little bit lighter orange. So when I hover, I get my what we call an eyedropper. Left click on that and it changes in my fill color. When I go to the stroke, I want it set to black. Pixels, okay, I'm fine with 8. You can type in whatever value you want to. Then when I left click and drag, I get the shape right here. And I'm just holding that left click. When I hold the shift key, it allows me to constrain the circle. And then it fills. I'm going to use my move tool right here, and I can left click and hold and move it. It's a little bit short, so I want to transform it. So you could go to edit, you could go to free transform, but what I just tell students, because there's a keyboard shortcut, I'm on a Mac, so it's Command T. If you're on a PC, it's going to be Control T. So I'm going to hit my keyboard shortcut. I'm going to get this bounding box, and then I can adjust and change it. When I'm finished, you hit the check mark, and then it releases it. So I'm going to double left click, and I'm going to call it Moon. You can see this is different. It has an icon down here, so it's letting you know it's a shape. Okay? By the way, the little image right there, that's called a thumbnail. Okay? So really explain that to your students, because otherwise they tend to click all over and then they're clicking the wrong thing, and they need to be aware of what they're actually like clicking on. Down here, once again, opacity, I'm going to adjust that because I still want to see my moon. I did about 50. Okay, so now the next thing I want to do is I've got to add my branch with my cat. So this is a little bit more difficult, but doable. Here's the pen tool. So if you want to make a custom selection, okay, here's the thing. Do you see how the moon got selected? I'm going to go back to my move tool. I'm going to left click in this gray area, and that deselects it, okay? So sometimes that can be a problem. Go back to my pen tool, and then I'm going to left click and drag. When I left click and drag, you're going to get what they call Bezier curves and the handle. So that allows me to do my curves. If I want to zoom in, I can hit Command plus or Control plus on a PC. So I'm just really quickly kind of outlining the cat here. And this is great for making custom shapes. Students do have a hard time with this one because it takes a little bit more effort to understand how to use this tool. But here's the payoff. If you get your students using this tool in Photoshop, they will feel way more comfortable when they're actually working in Adobe Illustrator. Okay, so I hit Command minus, Command plus, and you can zoom in and out. Okay, all right, so this path has been created, this custom selection. I'm going to go to my paths. If you don't see your paths, go to Window, look for paths in the list. It's ABC order. Okay, I'm going to left click on this. Okay, so it doesn't have a name, it's just called work path, but I'm going to double left click. I'm going to call it cat. All right, so because there's a thumbnail here, I can go ahead and select that and make it a selection. I'm going to hold my Command key on a Mac and see how the icon changes when I do that. If you hold the Control key on a PC, it's going to do the same thing. Left click and boom, cat selected. Going to go back to the layers panel. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and double left click, call that cat. All right, now I'm going to use my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to left click on my set foreground color, and I want it to be a brown. So I'm going to drop it a little bit more into my red, and then a little bit more like red orange. Okay, so then I'm going to drop it into the dark brown and hit OK. Then I'm going to use my paint bucket tool. This is selected, left click in that area in the space, and then it's going to fill that. So the marching ant stops the paint bucket tool. Instead of actually filling the whole entire canvas, that contains it. Okay, so if I hit Command D or Control D on a PC, it will deselect it. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to add another layer for some clouds. So I'm going to left click on the new layer icon. I'm going to double left click on it and call it clouds. So this is great now because now I can use my brushes. So if I go to Window, look for brushes, I already have my panel here, and I have a custom brush that I've made. You can use Kyle's brushes, okay? Those are free from Adobe. When you can Google search that, and as long as you have your login for Adobe, you can have access to all his brushes. A lot of people, they even offer free brushes on online, but use Kyle's, they're great. So I'm going to select this brush. If you don't see your brush panel, go to Window, Brushes. Okay, so brush settings have now been adjusted up here. Okay, so I'm fine with normal, opacity 100, flow is how much is coming out, 25 is good. Okay, I'm going to change the color, and I left click on the set foreground color, pick a little bit of an off-white color, hit OK, and then I'm going to just paint that in. So I'm going to just add some spooky little clouds, and I just left click and hold and add my clouds in here. So, and maybe one right here, maybe a little bit higher. Okay, so I've got my clouds. I've got pretty much everything set the way I want to. And what I want to do now is I have to convert these into smart objects. It just works a lot better when you're doing video timeline animation that you set your layers to a smart object. So what is a smart object? A smart object in Photoshop is basically a layer that ends up working a lot better because when you scale it or you size it, okay, it retains its resolution. It's like it's going to keep the quality the same if you shift or move things around. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with my pick, and I'm going to go ahead and right click once with my mouse, and then I'm going to convert to smart object. See, the icon changes in the thumbnail. Go to my next layer, left click once, right click, convert to smart object. Go to the next layer, left click, right click, convert to smart object. And I just keep going along and doing the same thing. So this lesson is really great for muscle memory. They just repeat a lot of things. Right click, convert to smart object. Okay, so all of these are now smart objects. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my timeline, which gives you a snapshot of everything that's really going on inside your animation. So pretty much most animation software has some form of a timeline. If you don't see your timeline down here, just a reminder, go to Window, Timeline, make sure that's checkmarked. If for some reason this panel ends up getting disconnected, do you see the blue highlighted edge? Okay, you can snap these panels to each other by just left clicking, hovering and holding, and then it'll connect. It's like magnetic. Okay, so right down here, I'm gonna left click here. So here's to option. We're doing the create video timeline. I'll cover frame animation later on, but when you set that, it's like a button. When I left click once, everything that is in here now shows up in my timeline. Let's go over some of the basic tools that you should be aware of. Okay, so here's your play button. Here's your move forward button. This is your sound audio. If I don't want audio, I just left click on that. I don't have any audio on it, so it doesn't matter. Here's my settings. On my settings, I'm going to do 25% resolution. It does help with a lower option. So for playback purposes, check mark loop playback. Okay, the cutting tool is if you needed to cut any of your clips. We're not going to use that today. Also, if you want to apply a transition, like a crossfade, things like that, those are options that you can use. All right, in the top of your timeline, you're going to see this blue shape right here that if I move it, this tells you where you are within your animation. Okay, the top right here is indicating how many frames and how many seconds have passed. Down here at the bottom, you're going to see a button that allows you to convert this from video to frame animation. We don't need it. This button allows you to render the animation. This shows you basically where you are within your animation. And then when you see 30 FPS, FPS stands for frames per second. It's going to play at 30 seconds. Here's a bar that allows you to zoom in or zoom out, and it just adjusts the size of this time portion of your timeline. This is a scroll bar that allows you to move back and forth. Okay. All right. So we're ready to do some animation now, but we want to save all this work. So let's go to File, Save As. I'm going to go back to my file here, and I'm going to just call this Test 1. Okay, I'm going to leave it as a Photoshop document because I need my layers there, and then I'm going to hit Save. Okay, so to animate something really simple, let's do the clouds. That's going to be fun. So if I left click on here, you're going to see 3 stopwatches. Okay, so the option to move this back and forth, that would be a transform. To transform it, I am going to go ahead and move my playhead to the beginning. And then I'm going to left click on the stopwatch. That drops your first keyframe. So what happens is a little diamond pops up. So what a keyframe is an animation. That's saying that's a major point of action. And then you have to have a second keyframe to tell Photoshop then knows like where we're headed to. So all I've got to do is move my playhead. I'm going to move it here. And then I'm going to use my move tool. And I'm going to click on my left click on my clouds, and then I'm just going to move it. If I hold the shift key, I can constrain the movement. See, I'm going to move my clouds that way, and then it drops another keyframe. So when I move the playhead back and forth, which is called scrubbing, see, now I have some animation going on here. So now I'm going to move it a little bit further, and I'm going to say, you know what? I want to actually and you can left click and hold and adjust the placement of it. Let's move it back that way. Okay. Let's hit play. So what you're going to notice, and I just hit the space bar. If I move this closer to the other keyframe, look at what happens. See, it changes the speed, it alters the speed, but I'm just going to go ahead and move that here. You can have multiple keyframes if you want. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and move this again. It should drop another keyframe. See, it's going to drop another keyframe. And then it alters. If you ever want to undo something, you can either hit Command Z or Control Z, and I'll undo it. See, it backs it up. Okay, so that's my initial placement right here, and I think I'm going to move it. Okay, so now I'm going to drop another keyframe here by clicking on the little diamond. Now I'm going to move it. And then I think towards the end, I'm going to move it back in the other direction. There's a lot more space. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to left click on the diamond. See, now the cloud's there. I'm going to hold the shift. Now I'm going to go in the other direction. And so let's play it. It should go back now in the other direction. And boom. Okay. And then it will loop again. I'm going to hit the space bar again. Okay, so now I want to change the opacity. So as it's moving, I want the clouds to kind of fade in and out. So now they're starting at 100% here. So I'm going to left click on the stopwatch, and then as it gets maybe here, I'm going to add another little diamond by left clicking here. And now I can adjust the opacity, but now it's only going to affect it at that point in time. And then if I want to, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to drop another keyframe by left clicking on the little diamond, and then I'm going to bring it back up to 100%. So when I go to the very beginning, if I hit the option to move all the way back to the beginning here of my timeline, and then I hit play, we should see a transition in the opacity. Boom. And it did. Okay, so that's how you adjust the opacity here. Okay, I can do that with some of my other options like my moon. I'm going to left click here, and so I'm going to drop the opacity again. I'm going to hit Command S or Control S on a Mac to save. Okay, so now let's do the opacity again on my moon. I left click once. That's saying that's the starting point. It's at the percentage it's at, and then I'm going to say here, I'm going to drop another keyframe by left clicking on the little diamond, and then I'm going to drop the opacity. You see a little bit more of the photo. I'm going to move it up here. That seems like a good spot. Left click on the opacity, and I'm going to adjust it back up to 100%. So now when we play it again, it's a little slow rendering or previewing it, but you can see that transition. So you can have your students play around with some simple effects to make some fun little animations using the video timeline. So now I'm going to hit the space bar. I'm going to hit Command S or Control S on a PC, and now I want to render it. Okay, so you can hit this render here. So if I left click on that, and it's going to think about rendering, and it's going to initialize my video export. So we're going to go over some of these options here. Okay, so this is the name of my file. I want to select where it's going to. Well, it's going to my desktop, and I'm okay with that. If I wanted to change that, I would left click on the select folder option. Okay, I'm fine with all of these settings, okay? Here's the thing with the frame rate. It doesn't really go at 12. It's going to play it faster. It's going to be more like what was down here at the 30 frames per second. Okay, so with this setup here, I'm okay with that. And then I would hit render. Okay, so when I render this is going to change it into an MP4 file, which is a file that is a video file. Okay, I'm going to hit render. I'm going to show you one other option, which is faster and probably going to make your students a little bit more happy about it. That's making it into an animated GIF or GIF. So this takes a little bit longer, but at the end of the day, if I minimize this, I get the video file here. And if I double left click on it and then I hit play, there's my animation. Okay, so this is a file that you could upload to YouTube. Now, if you would like to make an animated GIF out of this or GIF, I would go to File, Export, Save for Web Legacy, and a new menu is going to pop up. Okay, so it's going to have some other options on it, and it's going to allow you to change the size of it. Also, to make sure it's set up as a GIF. This image is pretty big, so it's taking a little bit of time. Easy to make. Okay, so thanks for listening, and hope you guys use this in a lesson for your digital art class.